Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to our second dinner meeting of 2023. And welcome to our 35 plus virtual members via Zoom. And we have a little more than 40 people here in the room. So good to see a healthy audience today. Okay, our chapter scholarship is still open for the rest of this month. We have two $1,500 scholarships. One open to any qualifying Montgomery County graduating high school senior. We also take applications for those in the fringe of Frederick County. And then a $1,500 scholarship open to any family member of an active chapter member. So that's been a value add in prior years. We voted as a board to up the dollar amounts from $1,000 to $1,500. So every dollar helps. As inflation grows, so do college tuition and book costs. So those applications will be accepted through the end of March. And we hope to have winners selected and be a part of the high school award ceremony, scholarship presentations in May, which provides good visibility to our chapter, which even with our February 28th expirations, our March 1st chapter totals were 2,017 members. So it's good to see us over the 2,000 member hike healthily on a routine basis since the pandemic. So continue to tell your friends of the great experiences you're having with the chapter. Okay, our friends of our chapter from Leadership Techniques, Miss Lisa the Hammer and Mr. David Newman recently wrote a book called The Engagement Matrix. That's free to all Amazon Kindle Unlimited subscribers, and the paperback, which could be delivered to your house by Friday, is only $20. So as project management changes, as PMI kind of pivots from processes to more different frameworks of doing things, the leadership techniques have also taken that and more decision-making references and how we engage as leaders and program and project managers. So a great book. We look forward to having Lisa and David be a part of our speaking program later this year as well. Training alert, first one local, the University of Maryland, who are one of the few universities on the East Coast that have their own Center of Excellence for Project Management. Within all their undergrad and graduate programs is having their annual symposium. That's Thursday and Friday, the third week of April. A little bit of a price there, but they extended their early bird pricing into next week. And some great presentations, a good way to earn up to 14 PDUs. One free training event from PMI Global. They're kicking off their virtual experience series for the year in a few weeks on Thursday, March 23rd. The featured presenter is the author of Come Up for Air, Nick Sonnenberg. There's also a good project management leader panel where the CEO of PMI, the CEO of Agile Alliance, the CEO of Project Management Association, which is international project management body, are all talking about like how they see project management in the 2020s. So a lot of good information. It's free, 7 PDUs, on-demand access. So I'd encourage everyone to at least register. And if you have meetings that you can't get out of that Thursday and you don't want to multitask, you can always go back to the materials. Our sister chapters, Toastmasters group is doing great things with virtual meetings the second and fourth Wednesdays of every month. Ms. Coward, did you want to come up for a quick plug?
Hello, everyone. My name is Sue. How many of you heard of Toastmasters by any chance? Wonderful. How many of you have not heard of Toastmasters? Great. So people have this misconception of Toastmasters where based on the name, you're about to go to a wedding, you're about to give a toast, and therefore you want to be prepared for it. But there are three things that I can offer you as a Toastmasters that you may not have considered before. The first thing is communication, not just with your coworkers or in the context of a business meeting where you're facilitating a meeting, but to be able to listen and hear what the other person is saying. I found that to be invaluable, and it actually has helped me not just in my work relationships, but my family and friends, church, and so on and so forth. So communication is something that's key for Toastmasters. The second thing is leadership. We're all here, we're facilitators, and I would say we're fairly comfortable with leading meetings, but there's a way to take that to up your game a little bit more. So if you're interested in getting practice on your leadership skills, there's ample opportunity to make that happen. And the third thing is, you would think that it's all dry in business, but it's not. We have contests. We're planning a get together soon after years and years of being virtual. So I encourage you to consider becoming a member of the PMI Toastmasters chapter. Our next meeting is Wednesday, March the 8th. We meet on the second and fourth Wednesdays. It's virtual currently. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, Sue. And I also want to pass the mic on to Supreet.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Supreet. I am one of the officers with Toastmasters along with Sue. So yeah, please feel free to reach out to us if you would like to attend a meeting or join Toastmasters.
Thank you.
In addition, our education partners have great programs. We're pretty close to updating our website training calendar with all their offerings. So between Lisa and David at Leadership Techniques and Joe Liani at Project Management Experts, Mr. Carl Pritchard, who runs his own business and is our risk management subject matter expert, is starting to do things again, both in person and virtual. For those who have a training education annual allowance, if you use it, great. If you don't, that's fine too. There's some great training opportunities for both certification prep, if you want to move past your PMP and go more in discipline agile, or portfolios or programs certified professional. And stay tuned on our newsletters for training highlights as well. Okay. It's our distinguished honor to introduce our speaker, Ms. Elizabeth Garza-Guidara. Diversity and inclusion have become a buzzword probably the last 3 or 4 years. For those who work or support the federal government, there's been a lot of diversity and inclusion training that's now a part of the mandatory annual training. I think the days of going to companies' websites and clicking on their leadership tab and you scroll from up and down, it's just Caucasian men are a thing of the past. For those that still have that C-suite leadership, I think they're being judged more from both perspective job seekers as well as on the contract and acquisition side as well. Our speakers, the founder and CEO of a new consulting company focused on driving diversity, equality, and inclusion strategic goals and initiatives. She's a U.S. veteran specializing in cybersecurity and counterintelligence. So thank you for your service. She's the current director of community engagement for the National Association of Asian American Professionals, which is a growing the presentation. Welcome, Liz.
All right, good evening, everyone. Wanted to thank you all for coming, as well as for our Zoom attendees. Wanted to thank Matt for inviting me to speak here tonight, as well as for my parents, Jim and Jill, for coming. So we'll move into the slide deck and we'll get started. Okay, so as Matt said, I'm the CEO and founder of Inclusio Consulting, LLC, and tonight we'll be talking about employing a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility approach to the project management lifecycle. Slide, please. Okay, here's an agenda of what we'll cover. Next. Okay, so I wanted to go over a little bit in terms of why diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility is deeply personal to me. So I'm a Korean American adopted by a wonderful Italian American and Scotch Irish American family. I don't know if any of you have seen or read stories or watched YouTube videos of like an animal from a different species that was adopted by a family of a different animal species. And it's kind of crazy sounding, but I read this adorable story about this cat that was adopted by a family of husky dogs, right? I mean, it got to the point the human family like even put like a fake, like I guess costume over her, and she acted like a husky, thought she was a husky. So anyways, I give that example because it's simplifying it, but my family, including my parents, of course, never made me feel like I was different. They always made me feel like I was included, like I belonged, and that was it. But unfortunately, the way the world is today, I'm a realist, is that the rest of the world always reminded me of how different I was, no matter how American I was, no matter how much I've bled blue, as a U.S. Air Force Reserve officer. So that's one of the reasons why, especially going back to South Korea, reconnecting with my roots and really getting a better appreciation for our opportunities here in the States. But in addition to that, I've really been blessed with so many opportunities, including living and working abroad in 4 different countries on 4 different continents. So during my time there, I really saw some interesting patterns of oppression and marginalization within their own unique cultural contexts, but also, experienced the ugliness of racism and sexism firsthand in those countries, including ours, of course, and challenged it. So one of the most rewarding experiences in my life actually is captured in that photo, was when I was deployed to Cartagena, Colombia for a counter-drug mission. I just got back this past fall. I really spent some quality time working with this amazing nonprofit owner, Julie, where we were working to empower young Afro-Colombian girls. Unfortunately, there's just a very, very radical gap between white and Afro-Colombians. So taking the time to help launch a mentorship and a self-defense program for these girls when they were socially conditioned to think that they were inferior was really rewarding for me, and hopefully for Julie too, and these girls. And with that note, I always tell people 2 of the best decisions I ever made in my life were marrying my husband and joining the Air Force. So in this picture here, with all the people in uniform, I was honored to be the U.S. military lead for U.S. Africa Command's in Stuttgart, Germany, 2019 Women's Military Symposium. So during that time, I got the chance to meet and network with and get to know all of these amazing non-commissioned officers and officers from 9 different African countries, and learning about the unique experiences they had. One of the most amazing stories I heard was from a Nigerian officer, was that when she was deployed to Lebanon, and their mission was to basically combat Hezbollah, was they were giving out feminine products to the local Lebanese women, just simply by building that rapport and having that access to that community that unfortunately their male counterparts didn't have. They got that trust to the extent where the Lebanese women told them where the hideout locations of key leaders of Hezbollah. So that there is just DEI in itself in terms of the accessibility to certain communities, to build rapport, to build trust, to increase operational effectiveness. Obviously in the corporate world, that's more so boosting revenue and maintaining top talent. So, and then on this photo here with the palm trees in the background, I had the opportunity to work with this amazing officer, Colonel Mahatma Williams. He's a senior officer in the Jamaican Defense Force at Joint Interagency Task Force South, and we launched that organization's very first Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month event. And that's very near and dear to me as someone who's an Asian American, as well as in light of the surge in racial violence against people who look like me, as well as the surge in violence against people who look like those girls and these women in that photo. So, I'm really honored to be here tonight, and that's the why behind all of this. That's why I decided to launch this consulting firm. That's why I decided to finally take pride in my Asian heritage and volunteer to be the Director of Community Engagement for the National Association of Asian American Professionals. Slide. So, I wanted to have another vulnerable moment with you all and, share with you how I actually initially failed to employ a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility approach to the project management lifecycle when I was at Joint Interagency Task Force South. So a little bit on the background so you can understand where I made my mistake was this organization had 550 people, including the executives here in this photo, who were, there were 25 international executives from 20 different countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. They're wonderful people. They really wanted to get involved in the counter-drug mission, seniors in their countries, but unfortunately, 90% of the information that our organization had in terms of tracking illicit drug movements couldn't be shared with these executives because the information was law enforcement sensitive. So it was owned by Homeland Security, it was owned by FBI, it was owned by the Drug Enforcement Agency. So my challenge as a diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility manager in this role was to discover new ways in terms of how we could integrate these senior executives from all these different countries into the battle rhythm and into ongoing initiatives within our organization. So I took it upon myself from the US point of view in terms of hearing from other US personnel in terms of what we thought was best for them in terms of, placing them in different initiatives. And then, I presented it to them, hey, this is what we're gonna do, here's the plan. Right at that point, I was 8 years in the Air Force. But I noticed that I was met with a lot of heavy silence, right? People didn't really seem to be engaged. So that was a bit of a warning sign for me. Then that same officer that you saw in the previous slide, Colonel Mahatma Williams, he felt comfortable enough, to talk to me and say, hey, Liz, we understand you're really trying to help us, but it's really not. You're coming off as imposing things as opposed to including us in the process. That's where I failed. And that's why I realized sometimes, it's human nature. We have these assumptions in our head in terms of what we think is best for something, but we really need to break down even some of the most seemingly simple assumptions and include everyone, right? So I took that feedback, and actually it was one of the most valuable growing experiences throughout my career in terms of, including people more and also learning how to be a coalition builder throughout all phases of the project management cycle. So that's when we worked together, myself and the 25 executives, to brainstorm in a safe space and talk about, hey, what's your biggest pain point, right? Their thing was accessibility. And actually, interestingly enough, there are a few where English was their first language from the European countries, but most of them, English was their second language. And for a few, they didn't speak English at all. So they had to rely on translators. So that's the equity piece, which we'll get into in a little bit. So we came to the conclusion as a group that the business need during the initiation phase was a request for information program, right? So how can we increase the two-way information sharing between US personnel needing information on drug trafficking organizations, and also when the senior executives have questions from their countries, right? How can we make sure that they get a response in a timely manner? So it's a two-way street. So then once we moved into the planning phase, we strategized a standard operating procedure to formalize it, right? So it's more transparent, it increases that trust. And it's like, this is on paper in terms of what we're going to do. And on top of that, we had a memorandum drafted that was then finalized and signed by the Director of Intelligence, as well as the Chief of the International Affairs Division, who oversaw all of the operations with the international executives. Moving into the execution phase, that focused on the actual exchange and inputting the RFIs. Again, focusing on trust and transparency, which is what DEI is focused on, DEIA, excuse me. So by doing that, we made sure everyone had access to the SharePoint and was trained up on how to use it in terms of submitting those requests for information, and then also briefing those at the monthly meetings with the CEO. So there's that social accountability piece too, right? No one wants to look bad. And why is all this important? How did it contribute to I guess, improving the organization? Well, first off, I'm not saying it was all just the RFI program, but this really opened the door for a lot of different initiatives between the international executives and the US personnel, to the extent that we saw a 30% boost in operational success, which really meant an increase in drug seizures, illicit drug seizures by our partner nations, which really means strengthening key partnerships with 20 different countries. That's huge. And then finally, 2021 was actually a record-setting year for our organization as far as operational success in the 32-year history of its organization. So I told you why it's important to me and how I learned from DEIA, but bigger picture, why should you care, right? So the world obviously is comprised of many, many different diverse communities with different needs, backgrounds, and perspectives. But if we break it down from the project team, the customers, and the clients, and how it benefits the organization as a whole, I guess we'll focus on the project team at first. If everyone can feel seen and heard and valued, just like the international executives eventually came to feel that way once I realized that I wasn't being an inclusive leader in that sense. There's a smoother sense of collaboration. If people feel that sense of psychological safety, there's more innovation. Teams tend to be more resilient, and they're more committed to the team because they have buy-in, because they feel like they have skin in the game, right? So that's the benefit from the project team perspective. Then as far as the customers and clients, if we can think about how we can make products, so in this case, project deliverables, more equitable and more accessible for a diverse range of clients and customers, that's a win for everybody, right? Boost in revenue, we get a big following, and yeah, it's a win. And then finally, for the organization as a whole, for me, it's been important to break down diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility. It's this long acronym, right? Into what are the basics? Dignity, respect, trust, and transparency. So if we focus on the organization as a whole, having all of these various, systems and policies and procedures, how can we make those more standardized? How can we make them more transparent? Because in the end, when you make things more transparent, when you make them more standardized, when you make it evidence-based, whether that's how people are rated on their annual performance reviews or how feedback is given or how people are given tasks, that's a win for everybody. It's not preferential treatment for just certain underrepresented groups. Slide. So I wanted to share a short video from Delta Airlines showing the benefits of DEIA for the project team and the organization as a whole.
One stereotype, or I guess common misconception with Polynesians, is that we all must play a sport. It kind of just defines us and encloses us as one thing or one person.
Like sometimes when I walk in the room and then everybody turns around and looks at me, and I think it's just because of the things that people see on the media and things like that about just stereotypes of people that look like me and dress like me.
In the Latin community, being gay is not that it's not acceptable, but the way that people approach it is a little bit different than, for example, here in the United States. I ended up living two different lives.
I began to learn English when I was 24, I think. Because of your accent, they tend to perceive you as someone who can contribute less, which often is not true.
As I grew up in a world that was not built for me. There generally has been an element of having to prove myself.
A waitress came over and said that we couldn't hold hands in the restaurant. I was really just kind of heartbroken that somebody would feel that way just because I'm holding hands with a woman.
The assumptions people put on you, it doesn't bother me now, but I remember when I was in college and I had told a gentleman that I was in the aviation flight science program, and he basically laughed in my face when I told him, you know, my career choice. I hope that as time goes on, I don't want to be a rare sighting.
My favorite thing about Delta actually is I was just always me. Like everybody treated me like I'm Yusra and nothing else.
I can't imagine being in other places where I can't be who I am. And Delta makes it so easy for me.
We're not the same. It is okay. Delta is giving you the opportunity of being who you are and using those qualities to engage with passengers in the United States and if not in the world.
Delta
Okay,
flight
and the next
attendants
video
are the last group of flight
that we'll
attendants
watch
flying for a major.
is an Apple commercial showing the importance of employing a DEIA approach for customers.
Cross that line, it ain't your day. I need my spot. Get out my way. 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 I need my spot.
Moving into the first phase, so I know it's a lot of words on the slide, so focus on the words highlighted in red. First off, does anyone want to volunteer and know the difference between equity versus equality?
Equity is removing barriers so that everybody has the opportunity to see versus
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I think people are asking you to repeat that or, oh, does anyone want to talk about their interpretation or understanding of equity versus equality?
So imagine, we're getting injured on a battlefield. Some of us have little cuts, some of us have arms chopped off, but we all get the same advantage. That's equality, but what we need is equity. Person with the arm cut off needs a tourniquet. Person with the bullet wound needs a bandage, pressure, and other things. There's different injuries require different methods of treatment. So equity is, I'm going to give you what you need to make you equal to what this other person has.
Those are both great examples, LeVar and Earl. Thank you for sharing. Anyone else?
boxes at the same height. And that is what but one person is taller than the other, which means the taller person can see it and the short person can't. Empathy would mean that the person who's short should get so that he also.
Yeah, that's yet another great example. Does anyone in Zoom land want to chime in via chat or? Oh, okay. Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Just in terms of diversity, and the first question of how diverse is our team, I think a lot of team crafting now is looking at like the core groups, like on your surveys and questionnaires, to make sure like you have a diverse collection of people and talent. Do you think that's the right way to go? Because then that goes against the right person for the job or the best person interviewed, or if we're looking at things from that lens. So what's your kind of guidance on the Zoom? If you're,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Rephrase the question.
Sure. So Matt asked a good question, I guess, on kind of affirmative action versus like basing on a meritocracy. So it sounds very generalized, maybe idealistic, but I believe that we can have both and that you can have a meritocracy while still pursuing diverse talent. It's just about finding diverse talent and making sure that we have the right avenues for engaging, right? I mean, even my experience, other, military veterans, especially, which are, a special demographic group, get frustrated because they submit the resumes over and over that don't pick up on certain algorithms. You have extremely talented people with 10, 20 plus years of leadership experience, but trying to find ways to translate that into the civilian world, right? So that's, did I answer your question? Okay, great. Yeah, so great point with Matt. Going back to the equity piece, all great approaches to it. I guess the textbook answer is more so equality is alluding to what everyone already said in terms of everyone's the same, therefore everyone should be treated the same and given the same resources. In contrast to that, equity realizes and acknowledges that we're all different. And because we're all different, we all have different needs. One of my mentors gave me a really interesting example in terms of the fact that, during the pandemic, him versus his business partner. So he was on, each person in his household in Richmond, Virginia, was given just one COVID test. He's just single by himself. But his business partner is a family of 7, but he was only given one COVID test for the entire household, right? So that's just a very, general example of equity. So how this translates into the project team is that everyone, is different, not just in terms of tangible things like, race and gender, but also in terms of how we process information and how we learn, right? I'm a visual learner. There's probably a lot of you in here who maybe, learn better through listening or doing things like haptic learners. So it's recognizing those differences, talking to your people, and adjusting fire as needed. As far as equity and accessibility goes for the customers, it's important to have that mindset for how can we make products and services equitable and accessible from the very beginning of the phase, the very beginning of the project management life cycle, right? So a good comparison that I like to think of is it's like adjusting an architectural blueprint at the beginning of, making a building or constructing a building versus when you're almost done with the project or you're already done and you're evaluating how good it is, taking a bulldozer and knocking down an entire wall because you realize it's not equitable or accessible for a few or even just one demographic group, right? So that's the main theme here. Slide. Okay, so when we move into the execution phase, it's important, again, to remember that diversity is not just in terms of what we see in terms of physical differences. It's important to promote diversity of thought. And that, of course, is tied in with the inclusion piece, right? Has everyone not only just been included in the brainstorming process, but do they feel like they have a safe space to express their thoughts and their ideas and even speak up to give constructive criticism, right? And sometimes that can be hard, especially in a large group where, you may be one of the only people who is expressing concern over something, over a project. And then equity. What I mean by have roles been assigned equitably to team members is recognizing not only that maybe this is like the fourth or fifth project for someone and they're working on other simultaneous projects, but also that everyone has different, interests in terms of their career advancement and promotion. I bring this up because a few years ago, I read a very interesting Harvard Business Review article in 2018 that talked about glamour tasks versus office housekeeping tasks, right? So that's the equity piece in terms of who needs what. So according to that case study, they found time and time again that oftentimes glamour tasks were given to the dominant group, so mostly white men, while the housekeeping tasks were more often given to underrepresented groups, so typically women and people of color. When those groups or anyone in general gets overloaded with a lot of housekeeping tasks, that can negatively affect their career because they don't have as much time to work on things that are higher visibility or show that strategic importance to show their larger leadership role and how they can move to that next leadership position. And then this giant column here for customers is meant to cover all of the letters of the alphabet soup of this acronym in terms of the importance of including subject matter experts. In this case, which would be employee resource groups. How many of you have ERGs, or I guess let's start off. Does anyone want to, I guess, share what their thoughts are on what an employee resource group is? Or does anyone have an employee resource group at their company? Okay, great. So the simple answer is that these groups are commonly based on shared demographic traits, whether that's race, gender. In many companies, you have women's ERGs, African-American ERGs, LGBTQ+, et cetera, commonly used for sources of mentorship, support, and career advancement. But what I'm emphasizing in this slide here is that ERGs can also be used as consultants, as subject matter experts for making products and services more accessible and equitable for people who look like them or think like them, right? I'll give you an example. McCormick Paint Company used their Native American ERG to consult them on creating a palette of colors that would pay positive tribute, pay homage to Native Americans in terms of the colors used as well as the names, right? So that's huge. Slide.
One question.
Sure.
In terms of equity, I think there's still a big gender equity in pay problem across the country. Some recommendations have been to apply what the federal government and the military do in terms of public pay scales. The counterpoint to that is not everybody should be paid the same based on the experience they have because of what they're contributing. What are your thoughts? Like, what's the right DEIA lens in terms of pay equity?
That's a great question, Matt. Oh.
Well,
Okay, so Matt asked another great question in terms of how can we close the gap on pay equity for, I guess, gender specifically, and whether or not it would be beneficial to use the public pay scale like the military and the US government does. I could see benefits to that, but what I see more benefits in is just pay transparency in terms of when you post the job, literally put the pay range, because it goes back to the fact transparency, and when there's a lack of transparency on deciding what the pay range is or how people are evaluated, for instance, it becomes a petri dish for bias. And there's multiple case studies, according to Harvard Business Review, Forbes, that when you lack that standardization of what's agreed upon ahead of time, then when it comes to a job offer negotiation, certain people may get lowballed while others may not, right? So that's where bias creeps in. Great question.
a lot of pay ranges are like anywhere from like $60,000 to $100,000 difference. That's a big.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, when we move into the execution phase, so I'm focusing mostly on the equity piece for team members. You know, it's really focusing on the fact that, you know, teammates' needs can evolve over time based on the obstacles they encounter throughout the project. And then for customers, It's recognizing the fact that changes to project scope or updates to the project itself can impact different demographic groups uniquely. So I'll give you a really interesting example from a web accessibility course that I've been taking. So there's this really brilliant English professor. His name was Dr. John Slayton at the University of Texas. Unfortunately, he developed some sort of pigmentation disorder, and he eventually became blind. Fortunately, he was able to use screen readers and able to establish himself as an international expert. Unfortunately, in 2005, he was diagnosed with leukemia. It was really sad because many of the websites he went to were not 508 compliant, which means that those websites were not accessible to people with disabilities, including blindness. So he couldn't make really important life and death decisions on treatment paths for leukemia because a lot of the websites back then, I guess, weren't very accessible. On top of that, he started his own blog called Letters of Leukemia or to Leukemia to stay connected to his loved ones and to colleagues all over the world. Unfortunately, the vendor for that blogging software updated their software to the extent where it was no longer 508 compliant, meaning it was not accessible to Dr. Slayton. So he lost connection with all of his loved ones and colleagues all over the world. So really tragic. It's important to think about how things that we may see as good, faster, better, shinier, how does that impact demographic groups that we're not thinking about? And that's why it's important to leverage the expertise of your employee resource groups. Slide. Okay, and then finally, closure. Focusing on the inclusion piece for project team members, right? Including everyone on the lessons learned brainstorming, but also asking them to share how included did you feel throughout the entire project management life cycle, right? Whether that's a survey, whether that's one-on-ones, however people feel the most comfortable. And then on the customer side, our marketing materials inclusive of the diverse communities that we serve. Apple's commercial was a perfect example of that. Slide. Okay, so to put some of this to work, we're going to do hopefully a fun exercise. It's based on the fact that how many of you have seen the cartoon version of Hunchback of Notre Dame? Okay, yeah, I have two. So Disney actually is coming out with the live action version of this next year. So our exercise is going to be split so that half the room is going to be project team members, half are going to be consultants, right? So the important part is working together to identify the most effective way throughout each phase of the project management lifecycle for both of these categories throughout each phase, right? So if I'm a project team member, what's the most effective way to promote DEIA for my team? And then on the flip side, if I'm a consultant, what's the most effective way to promote DEIA for the customers, which in this case are movie watchers? Okay, so we'll go through this and the next slide before we do the assignments. I guess we can just do this. So role assignments, you have it. If you're in person, you should have one of the worksheets that show detailed descriptions with the numbers and the roles. What we'll do for the in-person attendees, we can just assign it now, is that there are 6 tables. So we'll just go one by one. So this table will be 1s, 2s, 3s. In the backs, you'll be 4s, 5s, and 6s. Yep. And what I'd like to do for the virtual attendees is to, since there's a lot of you, just go around and type in the number that you'd like. So start off with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then start over. So we'll have 2 separate groups. Virtual will talk together to be able to brainstorm for 30 minutes, while in person will brainstorm as well. Okay, slide. Okay, so the execution piece. So forget the words on the screen. You're not going to brainstorm together. There's too many people all together. So again, there will be 2 groups. So each of you have different roles, whether it's a member of the project team, AKA the ones making the movie, versus the consultants, whether you're a French historian consultant, a Romani consultant, or a disabilities consultant, thinking about the needs of the customers. And then filling in, this chart here is for you all to, as the in-person attendees, to brainstorm or to put the most effective way for promoting DEIA within each phase of the cycle. So what I want to emphasize here is don't feel like you need to hit every letter of the acronym for the most effective way within each phase, right? Just, you can focus on one or two, or if there's a way to combine all of them so it's smooth, that's great. And then at the end, one designated person from the in-person group will present, and then we'll have one person from the virtual group, hopefully they can be heard, will present their results, okay? And there's rubrics to help guide you through the thinking process with different questions to ask at each phase, and virtual attendees should have soft copies of this as well. Any questions? No? Okay, break. Oh, and if you have questions virtually, feel free to put it in chat. Ideally, two different groups to talk about what they came up with. Any takers?
So we were category number one. I think we were the producers of the film. So in the initiation phase, we're going to take into account people with different appearances, people with different language issues, ability of the crew to get around the set physically. And as one of our colleagues said, these are basically teaming arrangements taken kind of to a different level. In the planning, we thought about what our speaker said about glamour task. We're not going to give the glamour task to one group and then give the grunt task to everyone else. We're going to take into account cross-training and what else here? I think that just about covers that. We also talked about religious holidays. This is a good time of year to think about that. How do religious holidays possibly affect your production schedule? That's something most people probably don't think about very much, but we're going to. Execution, we were talking about things like accessibility and 508 and how that takes time and testing. So we might need to take that into account as we execute. And we want to keep checking in with people as we're going along. Is the plan we set up in the beginning actually working? And then as we close, we're going to do hot washes, retrospectives. How did things work for everybody? And we might want to do some surveys or some confidential ways that people would say that, because they might not feel comfortable saying it directly to you if there's someone that you might be working with again. So, so that's kind of what we came up with.
Awesome, Karen. That was really great, especially with the religious holidays and how that can affect the production schedule. So very thoughtful. Anyone else? We can take one more. No?
It's gonna be short. All right, this is gonna be short. What we did, five, we were table 5. Yeah, so what we did find out amongst all of us as we talked is that this is really difficult. You know, the whole concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know, it's just kind of over our head. We're like trying to figure it out and we just can't get our arms around it. It's very difficult. So we didn't know whether or not we wanted to change the whole plot. Should we do something different? Should we make, you know, him, you know, not even be in a church? You know, what were we going to do? And so we just couldn't get past that. But I just wanted to point out that, you know, it's very important that we tackle this subject, but it is a very difficult subject, and kudos to those who do tackle it. So it's very important. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you, you know, being willing to be so vulnerable. And you're right, it is really difficult work to get into that mindset. It can be very challenging. We have someone from our Zoom.
Just that they were able to share some good train of thoughts on initiation and disability control.
Okay, great. Did we want to unmute any of them, or you think no? Okay. No, we're just gonna, yeah. Okay, so yep, thanks for sharing that. I wanted to share this photo of Marco Bizzarri, the CEO of Gucci, and really showing how, you know, he as a CEO embraces the importance of DEIA at the center of everything that we do, right? So it's not just a tectonic plate in terms of a couple of days of training, check the box. Actually, I took a really interesting DEIA certificate course with the University of Cambridge in their executive education program. And it was taught by a neuroscientist who made a great point. I wanted to leave you with this, is that DEIA is not like Amazon delivery. It's not just check the box and you get it. It's like gardening. It's a process in terms of really nurturing that mindset and that sense of belonging for people. Okay, slides. Now, this is a little bit of an eye chart, but I just wanted to show you, I know this is in the way, but if you, hopefully you enjoyed what you heard and what you saw tonight and a little bit of the exercise. So if you want to find out more about how I can potentially help your organization, I can do anything from, you know, free initial consultation to stuff that's a la carte. So that's DEIA workshops and presentations, climate surveys, that sort of thing. But also on a longer term level, discovering ways to incorporate DEIA into the design systems and life cycles for products and services to hopefully attract more diverse customers to then boost revenue. And then also from the more traditional talent management and employee engagement system lens in terms of making processes and systems more transparent and standardized so everyone wins, so that we can build that culture of belonging to recruit, retain, and promote top talent. Last slide. And that's it. I have my QR code there. And I wanted to thank you all so much for coming to hear me speak. And I really enjoyed hearing everybody's thoughts.
Any questions or just general commentary to share? Okay. Through the newsletters, you've seen that our election season was a little bit delayed. We'll be closing the loop on that, so you'll be getting the e-ballot from PMI. We're still looking for somebody to help out with our programs and get great speakers like Liz. So if that's something that you're thinking about, get in touch with us. But for the role of president, we know that we only received one nomination, so that will be going through soon. So to make the informal introduction of our incoming president and returning to the president stage, Mr. Charlie Geis.
Well, I guess somebody's got to do it. and it's me. And it's something that I really like doing. And, you know, I will give it my all. So I was the first person to be at this club. And it'll be good for me to be more active than what I was for the last year. So I'm looking forward to it, and we're going to have a great time. So that's all I can really say. If anybody has questions or anything, let me know. But other than that, we're done for the night and free to go. You're welcome. Thank you. Thanks for coming.